fact that you're, yeah, so we're very much supporting them. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't quite hear that. But are you saying is there a local friends group for your river? Is that what you were saying? I'm sorry.
We've got 5,000 people in the swimming club.
Ah, the swimming club. Brilliant.
We've got 5,000 people in the Farming District Swimming Club.
That is a big number. And
we're wealthy too.
You can always sponsor Spanner Films in our next production if you like.
Friends of the River Froome did sponsor the film, just to say that.
Oh, did it?
Yes, we did. Yeah, we have a friends group. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. I was just going to write a Facebook post actually about everybody who sponsored the film should feel very happy about how far we've got from 18 months ago to yesterday's announcement. So, as you are part of the crowdfunders, I would like to thank you and pat yourselves on the back because that's a really big success.
Thank you for the publicity for our rivers because we badly need it.
Any more questions in the room? At the moment, I'm making a film set in the COP26 in Glasgow. I'm editing it at the moment, starring Jonathan Pye, the comedian. And at the moment, I'm just editing a scene that we filmed with George Monbiot and Jonathan. It's very, very bleak. I don't know if any of you saw George on telly yesterday on Good Morning Britain, breaking down into tears at the state of the climate and the state of the COP failure. Anyway, if you didn't see it, I really recommend finding that on social media, just on George's account. It's very, very moving.
We had a question at the end. I'm not sure if you caught that.
With success with the rivers.
What would you expect an inquiry to find, and how would it be in any way effective?
Well, the evidence is already there with the inquiry. I mean, they've already got the evidence of the illegal discharging. So what we need is prosecutions. So hopefully that will come from this investigation they're doing. The next step will hopefully be prosecutions. That's what we need. But then again, Southwest Water was just fined, I think, 50 million or something for discharging into the sea quite a few times, and then the very next day they were discharging again, and so the numbers are just not big enough. They'd rather take the £50 million fine than sort out the infrastructure. I don't know if you saw when they were talking about the Environment Bill a few weeks ago. The Tories were saying that the amount of money needed to replace the infrastructure, which is basically what's needed to upgrade the infrastructure, they said it was up to 650 billion. But then other people looked into this, including the government's own documents, and the figures were more like about 50 billion, which is, but that is about the same amount of money that since the water companies have been privatized 30 years ago, that's about the same amount of money that's been given to shareholders. So all of that money, in my opinion, should have gone into upgrading the infrastructure. And in fact, apparently, I haven't seen footage of this or read it myself, but somebody was telling me that 30 years ago, when they were making the case that the water companies should be privatized, one of the arguments was that the water companies, if they were privatized, they would keep up with the infrastructure repairs. So that's exactly what they didn't do. If there's any journalists in the room, there's a really good article to be written, going back and finding those what was said 30 years ago.
Any more questions?
I'd just like to say that if anybody would like to keep up with the work we're doing at Spanner Films, including this new film that's coming out hopefully next week, if you just get your email addresses to me somehow, perhaps give them to the organizer, or give them to Serena, my friend who's in the room. And then I can add you to our mailing list, and that's the best way to keep in touch if anybody would like to.
Excuse me. Can private groups prosecute the water companies, or is it too expensive?
Say that again, sorry.
Can private groups prosecute water companies, or is it too expensive?
I don't know whether the answer is, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I have been involved in these discussions recently. I don't know whether it's too expensive is the problem, but I think it would be, what would you be prosecuting, you know, what would the case be?
Well, if they're illegally pumping sewage into the rivers and that's against the law, it's an obvious thing, isn't it?
You mean, so like a private prosecution?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but these conversations are ongoing, and I think something is gonna happen. So it certainly should, and there's a lot of people talking about it. So hopefully, legal cases will be coming, or will be forthcoming. I think. I mean, it just beggars belief, doesn't it, that they're illegally doing it, that all the evidence is there. They don't even I don't think there's a really good panorama about this. That they don't even deny that they're, you know, they're not, that they are illegally discharging, you know. They're just, yeah, I suppose because they know that you know, under this current government, there's going to be no follow-up. But that's why the campaign has been so fantastic, to get it on the front pages all the time. And so finally, something is going to happen. There was a really brilliant moment for me in the making of Rivercide, because we got Charlotte Church on board, which obviously is unusual to have a live song, but we just thought we'd do it. And when she was on board, suddenly all the there was a lot of interest from the mainstream media, and so Charlotte went on to This Morning to talk about it, and you can watch it online, it's really good. She was you know, Philip, she obviously knows Philip and Holly, and they were like, how are you, and you know, you having your baby and all this. And then Charlotte starts, you know, saying, you know, the collapse, you know, ecological collapse, every river in England is polluted, and so on. And you could just see on the faces of, you know, This Morning people, partly they were thinking, how the hell has this got on? But also it was just like, wow, you know, we've got river pollution right into, you know, daytime TV. So that was probably my favorite moment of the whole thing, actually, when she said ecological collapse.
Just one question. The Good Law Project have been doing brilliant work around PPE, and they're also doing work around other legal lapses. Are they people who might get involved with this?
I think the Good Law Project are talking about something. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't exactly know, but I think they are involved in discussions. Yeah. I mean, if you lot did mention you've got money, but so there's a really good campaign called River Action. If anybody wants to put their money towards fighting river pollution, a campaign called River Action would be a good place to put some funds.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's us out of time with you, Franny. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and thank you everyone for the questions. Feel free to stay on the Zoom call to see the panel debate we're going to have in the room. But now I'd like to invite our fantastic panel up, and yeah, thank you, Franny. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone on the panel, for coming to join us. How this is going to work is I'm going to invite the panelists each to give a 1-minute statement about who they are and what they do and why they're relevant to this discussion today. So they're all going to have about a minute each to do that. Then we've had some pre-submitted questions, which we'll go through and invite the panelists to speak about. And then if there's any time after that, then hopefully we can get some questions from the floor. So we'll just start going down the row. And Melissa, if you're happy to go first, would you like to give a 1-minute statement about who you are and why you're here?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Melissa Hoskins. I'm representing Bristol Avon Rivers Trust this evening. So I've just joined the trust, but I've been local to catchment for over 20 years. Yeah, so I work within the BART is a charity. So we work to kind of improve the rivers. So a lot of these situations where we go out, we go and do some monitoring, we'll find kind of using our local sort of got river BART beacons. So we'll use our local folks to kind of give us some monitoring information. We'll go out and we'll look, we'll do walkover surveys, we'll look for pollution incidents, we'll look for land management practices, and record all this data, and go out and sort of work to get some funding, to usually through the Environment Agency or private funding, charities, other charities, and we deliver improvements on the ground. So that would be working with landowners to try and improve best practice with farming, look at soil management, look at runoff, all sorts of issues that way. We also look at looking at barriers to fish migration. So a lot of these pollution incidents can be more detrimental because we've got so many barriers within our rivers. And when you've got pollution incidents, then obviously there's nowhere for the fish to move between or escape from some of these areas that are being polluted. So one of the kind of key pieces of work that we like to do as well is to try and remove these barriers to enable the fish to repopulate and access kind of better habitat. So it's kind of, yeah, and then also, yeah, sure. I also work with schools and community groups. So we work into schools as well, trying to educate with school children. So it's from grassroots upwards. So trying to get that enthusiasm for the rivers from that young age, and that, you know, that appreciation as well. So yeah, kind of quite a broad spectrum really.
Sorry to have to stop you. Just want to be very conscious of time.
Okay.
Matt, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Pang. I am a resident of Froome and a very keen fisherman. So I started fishing by the age of 4, and I've been fishing the River Froome for probably about 25 years now. Obviously, like many anglers, I developed a very keen passion for the water environment. So when I finished compulsory education, I went and studied a degree in fisheries management. Obviously, that's where I learnt about freshwater ecology and river management. And on my return from my studies at university, I came back to Froome and probably became the youngest chairman of an angling club in history. And yeah, so I'm here to represent Froome Angling Club, and yeah, always keen to try and do what I can to help our local river. Thank you.
Very much. Anne, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Anne Langdon. I'm a senior farm environment advisor for FWAG, which is the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. We're a farmer-led charity. We've been in existence for over 50 years now, working with farmers to improve the environment. And I've sort of been working towards projects in the Somerset Froome for around 10 years. We started doing more work with water after the 2013-14 floods on the Somerset levels. We did a lot of work on natural flood management, and a lot of the early work was done in the Parrett and Tone. We're now starting to work increasingly in the Froome and the headwaters of Froome above the town. We've also got a project that which the Environment Agency are funding to look at improving water quality in the catchments above Froome. It's not a lot of funding, but it's enabling us to start working with farmers to tackle some of the issues that we know are out there. So that's an ongoing project that hopefully we've got another 4 years or so to go.
Thank you very much. And then David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name is David Hellier. I'm a local dairy farmer. We're very much a family dairy farm. I farm in partnership with my parents, my wife, and 2 daughters. And I guess I'm here to represent the farmers.
Thank you very much. And then Ruth.
Hello everyone, I'm Ruth Baden. I'm Director of Environmental Solutions at Wessex Water, which is your local water and sewerage company. So my role is I work within our engineering and sustainable delivery department, so previously called our engineering and construction department. So this is the part of the company that spends about £500 million over a sort of 5-year period upgrading our infrastructure, both sewage treatment, our water distribution networks and water treatment works. to improve the environment and provide resilient services to our customers. And my role is really about looking for environmental solutions, so understanding where Wessex Water is contributing to any environmental deterioration, whether that's through our abstractions, taking water from the environment, or returning it to the environment through our sewerage and our waste infrastructure. And we're trying to look for understanding where we're causing those impacts and then what are the most sustainable solutions for that. So very much focused on catchment and nature-based solutions. And a key part of that is working in partnership with local communities, local authorities, Environment Agency, Natural England, and others to find the right solutions for the right locations.
Oh, thank you very much. Can I just check, can everyone in the room hear everything okay from the panel? No, okay. Well, we've got some microphones then. If the panel don't mind, when you speak and answer questions, just hold them up to your mouth and then hopefully everyone will be able to hear. Okay, I'll do the same as well. Sorry about that, everyone. So now I've got some questions that have been pre-submitted. So the first one is, what is the current state of the River Froome and its tributaries? How does this compare to other British rivers? Anne, I don't know if you'd like to start on that one. Should be able to.
Yeah, well, is that working?
You hold it just right up to your mouth. Maybe angle it a bit more.
There's no green light on yours.
That'll be one.
Switch up.
Yeah, so I had to have a look at the data on this because you can all have a look at the Environment Agency's data from the monitoring they do. It's on Catchment Data Explorer, so I went to that and had a look. I mean, I knew that as it said on the film, all the rivers are failing Water Framework Directive, but that can be for a variety of reasons. The sort of three headwaters that feed water into Froome, which are the Froome, the source, which comes down from Witham Friary Way, then there's the Maiden Bradley Brook, and then there's the Rodden, and they're all failing for a variety of reasons. So some of it's low oxygen, which is about the amount of nutrients, as we saw with the fish kill in the water. A lot of it's about phosphates in the water, other reasons for failure are the level of macrophytes and phytobenthos, which is all to do with the biology in the water. So that all three catchments are failing, but on those measures, and that's typical of Somerset, what's happening in all of Somerset rivers. I think there used to be one river before the most recent figures. The Pit, which goes south of Bruton up to the Brew, was in good condition, but I had a look at that and now it's got mercury. They've increased the testing for different things that have been tested, so now that's failing. It is typical of most of the rivers in Somerset that they've got high phosphate levels, and a lot of that's to do with some of the sediment that we've got. Coming down the rivers, the phosphate is attached to that. There's also hydrological issues that I think Melissa's probably better placed to talk about, but we know there are barriers to fish movement. There's poor habitat sometimes on river banks and things like that. And there was a catchment walkover actually that Bart did on the Rodden last winter with some funding. And that's identified all sorts of things that could be improved. I think one of the issues with those hydrological things is they're very expensive to put right. You've got two big weirs in town. I've seen various options appraisals on those, and that the sums of money you're talking about are eye-watering. So that they are failing for phosphate, and the reasons that the Data Explorer gives the reasons for not achieving good, and a lot of those are to do with diffuse pollution from agriculture. And we know that, for example, the Froome source, it's some of the heaviest land that we've got in the country. It's what they used to, when I first started working as a farm advisor, it's what we used to call London clay. It is really, really heavy stuff, and really suited to grassland farming. But for various reasons, some arable crops have been grown there. but it's also difficult. It's a difficult land to manage, you know, to some extent, our rivers in Somerset will always have been a bit muddy. We haven't got chalk streams, we haven't got crystal clear water, but obviously that, you know, that's been exacerbated by changes in cropping and changes in, I guess, in the, you know, we've got a tendency to go to bigger dairy herds, fewer. You know, when I first started work, there were 2 or 3 dairy herds in a village. Now there might only be one, much bigger. So there's all sorts of issues that we know, but they're pretty typical for, you know, the Southwest as a whole.
Thank you. Melissa, would you like to add anything to that? Or, no,
I
you
think
don't have to. I just thought
Anne's
you were.
covered most of it, to be honest. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine then. Anyone else on the panel like to add anything? Of course.
So I think in the, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the documentary, it said that every single river in England is currently failing. The reason they're failing is actually due to chemicals. So and most of these are ubiquitous chemicals in the environment. So things like plasticizers and flame retardants, which are ones which can't be treated by sewage treatment works, and the ones which we use in everyday lives. So that's the reason why the Froome is failing. Its chemical status, and there it's mercury and polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are plasticizers. Those are the reasons why it's failing. It's actually I've got some data on the Froome from I've got some flyers which did for the Farley Hungerford swimming club when I went to their AGM, and that shows the data for the Froome from Mells down to the confluence with the Bristol Avon. So I've got some handouts there if you want to have a look at those afterwards.
So that's the Froome below Froome. Yeah. So I think there's a part to play by you know, all of us really. I guess metaldehyde, slug pellets. You've done, Wessex Water have done a lot of work on that. And one of the worst cases that was found, I think, was somebody spreading it in their garden. You know, because farmers don't overspread. That's expensive, but you know, we used to be quite happily chuck quite a lot of these pellets around. So I think we all have to have a part to play in this, as Ruth says.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what is the impact of a polluted river on its wildlife, particularly noting the apparent decline in the numbers of wildfowl and fish? Matt, would you like to come in on this one?
Yes, thank you very much. I don't think I can really describe it any better than what you've just seen, really, but I'll give it a go. So obviously, I think when it comes, I do like this question to start off with, actually, because when we talk about pollution, you know, we often just talk about pollution and don't talk about the impact of pollution. And it's really important to actually define what the impact that pollution is having. So, and obviously the impact varies depending on the type of pollution. So as we've just seen, you know, we've got different types of pollution and different sources of pollution. One thing we have had in our local river on probably 2 or 3 occasions now in the past 4 to 5 years is we've had quite significant acute events of pollution. And you know, this is when you get a large volume of pollution being discharged into the river in a short space of time. And what you'll find when we have that is you'll have quite a severe impact upon the water quality. The water quality deteriorates, and effectively the river becomes toxic to anything that's living in it. And that's when we see those horrific scenes where you've got fish gasping and dying and invertebrates dying everywhere. Now, obviously, that type of pollution, it runs through, it goes, it's fairly quick events, but the impacts last a long time. So, you know, once you've gone through the pollution stage, you then go into the recovery stage. Now, the time it takes for a river to recover is dependent on a number of factors. So one thing that's been mentioned a few times so far is weirs. So weirs have a really big impact on the recovery time of a pollution. So normally what would happen if there were no weirs is you'd have the pollution, you'd have the fish kill, and then over time fish will migrate upstream and downstream, recolonize the river, re-establish those populations. When you've got those massive weir structures, that process can happen. So the impact will from the pollution will last a lot longer, and it will take a long time for the river to recover. In some cases, the rivers will never recover. And sometimes you will lose fish species altogether. So that's the kind of more acute pollution events. But then, of course, we have the chronic pollution, the diffuse pollution, which is when you've got that small amount of pollution being discharged into the river all the time. And the impact of that is, I guess, it's far more subtle. It's not as obvious to the average person. So one thing that we have discussed is obviously eutrophication. So diffuse pollution, one of the biggest issues around diffuse pollution is the fact that you've got that drip feed of nutrients going into the river all the time, and that causes the river to become eutrophic. And then as described, when you've got a eutrophic river, obviously that has a massive impact upon the ecology and creates a quite significant sort of imbalance in the ecology. Another thing that hasn't really been mentioned much so far is fine sediment. So fine sediment is also a type of diffuse pollution, where you get that runoff into the river that brings all of that silt into the watercourse. And that in itself can have quite a significant impact as well. So the silt, it causes effectively damage to the river. The gravels get smothered by the silt. That impacts on the habitat quality, it impacts on fish spawning, and it can have an impact on the invertebrates as well, and the diversity of invertebrates. So I think ultimately the headline is, around diffuse pollution is that generally what you'll see a reduction in that ecological performance, and it will limit the fish communities, the invertebrate communities, and the plant communities. One thing I haven't really touched on is the wildfowl, and that's because, to be honest with you, I'm not that familiar with how pollution might impact on wildfowl. If anybody else on the panel has any ideas, then please feel free to chip in. But I would say, as an angler and somebody that's fished the river for many, many years, I would definitely agree with that observation that the wildfowl populations do seem to decrease quite significantly. One thing I would say that might be a cause of that, but I will stipulate that this is speculation, but I guess one of the success stories in the River Froome in recent years is that we've got a very good otter population now. And obviously we've got mink in the catchment as well. And obviously both mink and otters do predate on wildfowl. So there is potential there that could be a reason. And yes, you did just hear an angler say that otters coming back is a success story.
Anybody want to add anything?
Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to add, I think on the invertebrate side of things, particularly with bark, we have a really broad range of volunteers that are trained up into riverfly, which it'd be fantastic to have maybe some Froome riverfly monitors as well. And they are like the key to these pollution incidents. So they're the first things that will detect if the pollution is going on in a river. So if we've got local community groups monitoring these rivers for invertebrates, we have a lot of community groups all over the Bristol-Avon catchment, but we'd really encourage you to maybe get involved in that way, because it is a really great way to kind of, you do a quick kick sample of the river every month, and those key species, if they suddenly disappear, the kind of ones that like the good oxygenation of the river, if they're suddenly not there, it just sort of triggers straight away that maybe something's wrong. So you can play a really good role in that side of things as well. Good.
Thank you. I'll take that. The next question was directly for Ruth, if you don't mind, that was submitted. And you've already touched on this, I think, when you spoke earlier, but the question is, would you agree that there are many aspects of pollution yet to be quantified in terms of both human and environmental health, in particular concerning the pharmaceutical and chemical inputs? Do you believe enough is being done in this direction, and should government be increasing resources for such research?
So I guess I'll kind of break that question down a bit. So yes, there are many aspects to pollution, and some of them are not necessarily the typical things which you might consider. So as part of the Water Framework Directive, which was mentioned in the film, there are about 83 determinants which make up good status, and the vast majority of those are around kind of chemicals and specific pollutants. So that includes pharmaceuticals such as antibiotics, antidepressants, cardiovascular disease pharmaceuticals as well, but also a wide range of chemicals, metals, so pesticides, and also some of those other sort of hydrocarbons and things which are found ubiquitously in the environment. And clearly, to be able to analyse for these regularly and effectively costs a huge amount of money. The water industry has been running a programme for about the last 15 years called the Chemicals Investigation Programme. It started in about 2003 and it's ongoing at the moment. And the previous phase of that, in between 2015 and 2020, all of the water companies came together. We analysed effluents from around 600 sewage treatment works and up and downstream of those sewage treatment works. And those sewage treatment works were particularly chosen because they're sites which discharge into lower dilution watercourses. So in theory, you should get the true impact of the sewage treatment works as opposed to other sources. And we analysed 74 substances, including metals and pharmaceuticals, as I've mentioned, those specific substances. And they were compared against either the environmental quality standards, where they exist and they don't for all of these substances, or the potential no effect concentrations, which are those which are lab derived standards, where there's an anticipated impact on ecology. And for Wessex Water's contribution, that cost £7 million. I think the industry cost was probably about £100 million because it was proportional to the size of the water company. So companies like Thames Water and Anglian Water, who are much larger than Wessex, obviously paid a higher contribution to that. And what that found was we were able to characterise effluent from sewage treatment works and understand which are those which are more readily removed through the sewage treatment process, and also which are less readily removed. And those which are complex chemicals and synthetic chemicals are much harder to remove by sewage treatment. That's not surprising. Sewage treatment is a biological process. It's not a chemical process. So that's not surprising that those substances are harder to remove. So there's been a lot of research undertaken by water companies, but there's probably a lot less understanding of actually the more broad spread across all of our water bodies, because it's so expensive and so time consuming and difficult to actually analyse these substances. This programme really challenged our commercial laboratories as well, both in terms of capacity and being able to develop the techniques for some of these substances. The techniques and methods didn't exist previously. So it's really cutting edge stuff, which is not kind of your everyday. But what that programme did was it meant that you could then model some of these substances as well. So in not all instances will samples have been taken from watercourses, but there may be modelled understanding of what the status of the water body is for those substances. So there is a reasonable amount of research which is going on at the moment. The water industry is continuing that research up until 2025, and we're picking key substances to understand, sort of get a longer data set over 15 to 20 years to understand how declines happen. So we have been monitoring things like DDT, dieldrin. These are pesticides which were banned in the 1960s, but are still present in our watercourses. And we're looking at what's the decline over that period of time for that as well, to understand the sort of more environmental impact. Within Wessex, we're actually doing quite a lot of work, not in this catchment, unfortunately, but actually in the Summer Valley, so around the sort of Midford Brook area. We're working with Baines, the local authority there, University of Bath and Natural England to undertake what we call a sort of a social prescribing project. So looking at some of the pharmaceuticals which you'd associate with non-communicable diseases, so things like diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease. Those, we're not allowed to call it lifestyle diseases, but the ones which are triggered by a sort of perhaps a less healthy lifestyle. And those are also fairly common in areas where there's a lower sort of socio-economic population. And so we're working with the health sector through Baines Public Health Department to understand the instance of those pharmaceuticals in that location and how that changes with increased social prescribing. So increased information about diet, healthy lifestyles, exercise, mindfulness, kind of well-being, all of those sorts of things. And with the University of Bath, we're undertaking samples both in the sewage treatment works for those substances and also in the watercourse to understand how much social prescribing is needed to be able to get down to the levels which are acceptable in the environment. And again, that's kind of a modelling exercise as well. But that's something which is actually probably a good approach, because to improve sewage treatment works, to remove some of these pharmaceuticals will cost about an extra £100 on customers' bills. If many of those customers are already in sort of financial difficulty at the moment, and that's challenging their mental health, then there's going to be this perpetual cycle where they'll be going to their doctors suffering from mental health and being prescribed more sort of antidepressants and things, which then end up in the watercourse. So it's kind of trying to break that cycle to a certain extent and provide greater amenity, and also obviously at a significantly lower carbon cost from doing that as well. So there's quite a lot of work in that area which is ongoing, but it does tend to be a little bit niche, and in sort of smaller locations rather than being rolled out sort of nationally. So in terms of the last part of the question, is there enough being done in this direction? There is a lot being done. It's very locally specific and it's very niche. Should government be increasing resources for this research? I think certainly around pharmaceuticals, yes, they should, because there's you know, the increasing kind of social and public health burden that goes on to this. It could be that public health funding linked with water company investment could then direct different, more sustainable treatment solutions, which actually are a better burden or a lower burden for society as a general, and improves local amenity in local areas. So I think that's a win-win.
I'll put that last bit in the booth just in case Mr. Walton was here.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
Good question.
It's, I think, there's an awareness week at the moment about pharmaceuticals, isn't there, about antimicrobial resistance and whatever. 11 different universities told me that they thought much more money should be put in to chemical and pharmaceutical research, and that it shouldn't all be on your shoulders. It should be on pharmaceutical companies themselves, government, local authorities, all sorts of people, because it's not just a pollution issue. And 90% of the chemicals that are in there, nobody knows the environmental impact, and there are more and more of these things being added every day, and we just don't know. And we point at Ruth and go, it's all purple, and it's not. Mostly.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next question. I've combined two here because we're running a bit short on time, but they're very closely linked. This question is, the main reason for the poor quality of our river upstream is farming, especially inadequate buffer zones to the river and pollution from livestock farming, including slurry, muck spreading, badly sited manure heaps, livestock accessing the river and parlour washings. What do we know about this issue in the Bristol and Avon catchment area? And then the second question is, what can be done, if anything, to help farmers reduce and eradicate their pollutants? So David, it'd be good to go to you first on this one, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me without the microphone, or do you want me to? Yeah, my voice generally carries. Firstly, I would say that farmers don't intentionally pollute, but we've seen from the video that it happens. Slurry manures are liquid gold to a farmer. Slurry is a huge resource actually on most farms. It contains the main nutrients that we need to grow grass, forage crops, and the saleable crops like potatoes, wheat, that sort of thing. So if you can fully utilize that, you have a very sustainable system. At home, we have dairy cows, we sell milk and meat. The cows produce slurry. We capture the slurry in slurry stores, and then we spread the slurry on the growing crops and on the grass, and that grows the grass. So actually the whole thing works very well. So the last thing we want is slurry, dirty water ending up in the water course. Nitrogen, potash and phosphate fertilizer are all about £300 a tonne. So what we don't get from the slurry, we have to top up with bought in, we call it artificial fertilizer. And as a result of the gas price at the moment, nitrogen fertilizer has doubled in price. The nitrogen has gone from £300 to £700 a tonne, and phosphate and potash have followed suit as well. So whereas slurry is worth thousands of pounds to an average dairy farmer, it's now worth tens of thousands of pounds. Also, if we're caught polluting, we get a £20,000 fine from the EA, plus the cleanup costs, plus it completely destroys your reputation in the local community. As farmers, and it's not across the whole of the UK, but a portion of the UK is in an NVZ, which is a nitrogen vulnerable zone. The whole of Wales, I understand, it's just gone into a nitrogen vulnerable zone. Where we farm in a nitrogen vulnerable zone. But I couldn't tell you exactly across the UK how much of it fits into it, but a good proportion of it does. So we have to follow some very specific rules. So we are not allowed to spread manures, slurries between the months of mid-September and mid-January. And the reason for that is that the soil tends to be fairly waterlogged at that time of year, particularly as the ladies said, we're on some fairly heavy soils here, but also the growing grass and the growing crops cannot utilize those nutrients because they're not actually physically growing. So from mid-January, we're allowed to spread. And I'll just give you a quick indication of how we would operate at home. So we'll start usually early February, because it's more on ground conditions that time of year. So we'll start spreading in February. We'll go on to growing crops, wheat and barley. They're in the ground, they're well established, and they'll start growing at slightly lower temperatures to grass, so they can fully utilize those nutrients. Then we'll go on to spreading on grass during March, and then in April we'll probably spread where we're going to grow maize and fodder beet and that sort of thing. And the slurries and the manures will be incorporated in the soil, and then we pretty much rely on those manures to grow those crops of wheat, barley, grass, and fodder beet and maize. And actually, we tend to go with a little and often approach where we can. So where we're growing grass, we probably cut it about 4 times in the year. So we'll put our first application on in February, we cut it in mid-May, we put an application on straight behind. That then grows the next grass crop, we cut that towards mid-June. 5 weeks after that, we cut it again, and 5 weeks after that, we cut it again. So we've usually finished by September cutting. And after each cut, we'll go in with slurry and manure to grow that grass. You know, there's no point in denying it. Pollution happens. As we said, it's certainly not done intentionally. Things happen. You know, I would say most of the pollution incidents probably happen during the actual spreading of the manure, particularly when umbilical pipes are used. And the accidents happen in terms of the pipe becomes split, vibrates on a stone. That's the worst case scenario for a farmer. If a pipe completely ruptures, very quickly the guy at the other end is spreading it and knows there's a major problem, and the guy in the pump can stop the pump very quickly. The worst case scenario is actually a stone penetrating a hole in it, because the guy spreading the slurry with a still slurry coming out, and you know, he can go all day without knowing, and there can be an awful contamination in one area. Rivers are always at the bottom of the hill. Your slurry, dirty water is a fluid. It's going to flow downhill, and if you don't know about it, so the things I would suggest to try and overcome these things, you know, are more training. So, for example, I would make sure that everyone that's spreading slurry has had proper training, because at the moment there is absolutely no training whatsoever. You can jump on an umbilical system or a tanker, spread farmyard manure and slurry, and there's no training, and people don't know the consequences of getting it wrong. We have to, as dairy farmers, we're red tractor audited every 18 months. It's quite a tough process to go through, and we would be. One of the questions is, have I got a manure management plan? So the amount of manure that I produce from my cows, have I got enough land to spread that over without overloading the land with nutrients? If I can't prove I can't sell my milk. And it's the same as the NVZ requirements anyway. So for most farmers, it's something they're already doing. You know, we have to have a minimum of 4 months storage for our slurries. And I would suggest that's probably is a minimum. It needs to be longer, because ideally, as I said, we start applying manures in February. We get years, very wet springs, and we can't get out there when we would like. So we probably need more storage than that, if we were honest. You know, and there other accidents happen when people are spreading slurry. Particularly, they spread it, and then we then get a monsoon, a lot of rain, and then it washes into the watercourses. And some of that can be mitigated through modern techniques of applying slurry, injectors. We would tend to aerate at home, that sort of thing, just in front of spreading anything. Put little slots in the grass, so when we put the slurry on, it's got somewhere to go.
Could you start to wrap up?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Okay. It's been mentioned a few times about diffuse pollution, and I would say that's certainly one of the things that we see. We saw on the video there those poultry farms, you know, and I'm not going to here to defend the poultry farms. The reality is the poultry farms are there because the consumer still demands cheap chicken, and you saw them; they look very clean. Those farms, didn't they? The reality is the sheds are all the manures in the sheds. There's no problem whilst the manure's in the sheds. It's once it goes out of the sheds and then gets it's either stored in heaps. Rain lands on that and washes all those nutrients out. The other problem is once it's been spread on the land, it sometimes, as everyone's sort of talking about, the phosphates attach to the soil and then the soil washes into the stream. So I would suggest that what we need to be doing is making sure that soil doesn't move. So we want no bare stubbles in the wintertime. You know, that should be certainly a goal we should be all striving for. So maize stubbles are particularly bad because there's a lot of bare soil there. So the farmers should be growing a cover crop on that, or they should be cultivating that across the slopes to make sure that water cannot you know, run down the slopes, taking with it the soil, the phosphates. Look, if you're happy, I'll just carry on just on the, because you asked for a few examples of what the farmers could do.
Just quickly, because
yes, okay. But sediment ponds will certainly take out some of the diffuse pollution, particularly where you've got, we call it, the chap said silt, mud, you call it. It's topsoil really, which has got the nutrients in. So these sort of things, and I would suggest that things that you can be doing is have demonstration farms, you know, get the Environment Agency to invite the farmers to demonstration farms that are carrying out best practice. If the Environment Agency invite the farmers, I tell you the farmers go, because the farmers know that if they don't turn up and get their name ticked off, the Environment Agency pays them a little visit for some one-on-one tuition. So actually the Environment Agency will get a pretty good turnout whenever they call a meeting. So I would do that sort of thing, you know. You know, and there's lots of little things that farmers can do. And I would suggest the government could also help out with grants. You know, we saw they were pointing the finger at the poultry manure. But if the poultry manure is stored outside the sheds, once the next crop of chickens has gone in, it probably needs to be stored under a shed. So grants for that sort of thing. And grants towards maybe upgrading some of the slurry stores that have been built in the last 30 or 40 years. They're coming towards the end of their lifetime. And making sure as these dairy farms, as everyone pointed out, have got bigger, they've got adequate storage for the amount of cows they've got.
Anyone else like to come in on that?
Yeah, can I just say, I think one of the key issues has been a lack of investment. Farmers in the Froome source catchment were sort of promised a catchment sensitive farming project about 10 years ago. They haven't had access to the grants that you might have got in where you've got NVZ areas. So they haven't been. I think there's two things that will help change farming. One is more regulation, more visits, more pressure from that, and then the other is grants to help people to invest. And you know, we want both. And the good news is that as of next year, farmers in that catchment will be able to apply for what we call water quality grants. So they're grants to do to put in roof or separate off clean water from dirty water, that sort of thing, so that they're not putting clean water into a slurry store, for example. So there's all sorts of things like that you know that can happen and are starting to happen, but it's slow and it's also very complicated. I was with a farmer on Monday, sitting down trying to talk about where do they go from here, and they're under a lot of uncertainty at the moment about what. You know, they're starting to lose their basic farm payment this year, and 2027 it will have disappeared. Hopefully by then we'll have got schemes that I hope that in the southwest we're going to benefit from the new environmental schemes, but we don't know. So this guy, you know, he's trying to decide what to do. His son's trying to decide whether he should come into farming. If he's not coming into farming, it's probably not worth the farmer investing. But if his son comes in, you know, that's a different thing altogether. So, you know, I think you talked about training as well. You know, we've been pushing to get funding in the Somerset Froome catchments to actually work with farmers, help promote what they can make changes in their farm infrastructure, whatever, to reduce diffuse pollution. We can help them to do their manure management plans or spreading risk plans, all sorts of things that will help them reduce the possibility of diffuse pollution. But it takes time and effort, and actually getting the funding is not straightforward. You know, we're more than halfway through the financial year yet, and we haven't got this year's funding agreed. And that's the sort of pressures. We're a charity. We don't have big, deep pockets to do these, to actually develop this sort of thing. So we have to put in a lot of time, which we may not get payment back for. So that, you know, it's underinvestment, both from the agriculture industry. It's a lot of the population of farmers is aging. So, you know, if you're coming up to retirement, there's a farm I can think of in the catchment who's not going to be farming in a couple of years' time. So what's the point of investing? You know, there's no point him spending money at that stage. So it is a very, very complicated picture that we haven't got you know, any clarity on at the moment. But I think, you know, the pressure, I think the Environment Agency will start to do more inspections, which we welcome to some extent, because we feel that is, you know, that is necessary part of the changes that are going forward. But you know, they've been underfunded as we saw in that film, but they've had budgets cut, and they you know, they can't help us necessarily get the funding that we need to actually get these things changed. But we have got this. We have got a project. We concentrated on the Froome source. We did walkovers in the Rodden Brook, and hopefully we can get started in the other catchments above Froome, and start actually getting some things changed on the ground. So that there's, you know, there's a lot of good things that are starting to happen, but it's been, I mean, it's like pushing a rock uphill. It's been really, really difficult to get that yeah, actually happening.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit conscious of time at the moment. It's 9 o'clock, but there's probably some questions from the audience. So I was just thinking, we've got a couple left pre-submitted. I might try and group 3 questions, so take 2 from the audience and 1 pre-submitted. So has anybody here got a question they would like to ask the panel? There's one.
It's not as serious as all the scientific stuff. Did any of you swim in the river?
No.
No.
That's a nice and quick question.
My time remember.
There's another question over there.
Hi, so I do swim in the River Froome, and I swim in the River Froome all year round. I was just curious, 2 things. One, where's the data coming from? And the data that was quoted tonight about the quality of the River Froome. Who collected that data and when, please?
It's from the Environment Agency data. So a lot of their monitoring is reduced, as George kind of said. Unfortunately, budget cuts and things like that. But every so often, usually every 3 years, and sometimes longer, they go out and collect data. So that could be electrofishing to get the fish data, water quality. Yeah, so it all
So
then.
you're talking about tonight, it could be up to 3 years old. Is that what you're saying?
The most recent.
This is 2019 that I think Anne was saying about.
Yeah.
So that's the late. They do it every tranche.
But in the early 2010s, that was being updated annually. But I think 2016 there was a big gap, and for example, we haven't got fish data in the 3 headwater catchments. There's only fish results in one of them. There's nothing in the other 2.
But one thing I would say is that doesn't include bacteriological data. So because the River Froome isn't a designated bathing water, the Environment Agency are under no obligation to collect that data. Wessex Water has got a bathing water investigation, which we're working, looking at Whalley Weir, because that's a potential designated bathing water site at some point in the future. And as a result of that investigation, we're looking to understand where the bacteriological contributions are further upstream. And so we have got 4 sites on the River Froome where we're collecting bacteriological data. So that's E. coli, intestinal and enterococci. And we've been collecting that on a fortnightly basis, I think since May through to very recently. So I can share that data.
So the Whalley Weir is the Avon.
Yeah, the Whalley Weir is the Avon, but we're collecting data from about 20 points upstream Whalley Weir, including 4 in the Froome.
That's where I was confused, because I do email your comments, which are lovely and stuff, but as a river, you know, as a swimmer of the river, I want to know what the quality of the water is today, not 3 years ago.
The problem is that it's bacteriological data, so you have to take a sample, you have to take it to a lab, you have to grow it, so it takes 4 days to get a result. And that's so part of the investigation at Wally Weir is using sensors and AI to be able to understand if we can provide data in real time.
So as a follow-on from that, can I ask from Wessex Water, what is the criteria to do the study on Wally Weir, given that it is in effect a private island, as opposed to do it around, you know, focusing the voluntary activity on the River Froome that is got an established swimming club with a lot more users, many more anglers. I just never quite followed that.
So the reason we're doing the investigation there is it's a regulatory requirement, and it's because we are aware that the owner there is looking to apply for designated bathing water status, and he's lobbied both Wessex Water and the Environment Agency. Wessex Water started undertaking a voluntary investigation there, but then bizarrely, once Ilkley was designated, the Environment Agency then made it a regulatory requirement for us to actually continue that investigation and to report back to the Environment Agency on the results there. What we did do is we understand that there are a number of locations upstream of Whalley where there are recreational uses, whether that's swimming or kind of paddleboarding, and also quite a lot of amenity use around Bracknell and Avon, places like that. So we use that as an opportunity to collect samples specifically from those locations, because we're aware that other swimming clubs, potentially, whether formal or informal, may be interested in applying for bathing water designation in the future. And it's really, really helpful if you've got some data, because otherwise you'd be applying for it cold without any information. So at least it's useful to have maybe a year or two's worth of data to understand what's your likelihood of passing or failing. Because the thing with the Bathing Water Directive is if you fail for 4 years, it's then de-designated. It seems pretty pointless to apply for designation to know that you're instantly going to fail. So at least having some data and understanding what are the causes of bacteria in that location are quite helpful to then have an action plan to resolve that, so that you stand a better chance of keeping that designation once it's been obtained. So it's to a certain extent, it's our recognition of river usage, which means we're collecting the data, and happy to share that as well.
Any other questions? We've got one here.
Can I ask Wessex Water, who is it who gives authority to release raw sewage into a river? What's the system? Is it your operations manager, your operational team?
There's a lot of misinformation and miscommunication around storm overflows. So we don't release raw sewage into rivers.
It's exclusively storm overflows.
It's storm overflows, yeah. So what you'll find in Froome, the majority of Froome's sewage system is combined. So from your house, if your house is pre-1960s, the roof water and any other rainwater that falls on your house goes into the sewer as well. And so once that sewer is reaches capacity, overflows operate, and overflows are permitted by the Environment Agency. They're permitted under wet weather and into locations which are deemed to be less environmentally impactful because the river is in space. The problem is they're not monitored for their environmental impact. So it's a bit of an assumption there that there won't be an impact. But all of our overflows are permitted to operate under those conditions. I've got some nice fact here. So the average size semi-detached house generates the same volume of rainwater through sewage from 120 properties during one average storm.
These are legal.
They are legal.
We heard on the film that there are thousands of illegal releases from the companies.
So then I would like.
So somebody is saying release it.
No, no one's saying release it. I think what they're saying is it's illegal because it is being released prematurely, either when it's dry or not, or you're not passing forward the right flow to your sewage treatment works.
Somebody still has to say.
No, so it's not a decision which is made. It is the way that the system is designed. So no one actually says knowingly, oh yeah, that's fine, just chuck it in the river. No one says that whatsoever. What is happening is that possibly the system isn't designed to take the flow that it needs to, therefore it discharges prematurely. The other reason why you do get a lot of illegal discharges is due to blockages in the sewers. So you saw, you know, sanitary products, wet wipes, things like that, fats, oils and greases. If your sewer is blocked, it cannot flow properly, and therefore it will discharge at a time when it shouldn't and in a location when it shouldn't. And that would be deemed as an illegal discharge and a pollution.
We're very short on time, so can I just get everyone who's interested in asking a question to raise their hands now so we can get an idea of how much is left? We've got two, so three. Can I take them all together, just one by one, and then we'll ask the panel to answer them all together. So at the back here.
We heard about water company compliance. What about compliance for other organisations and companies that might pollute the rivers? And we talked about fatbergs, for example. That means things like the catering industry. I think there is a culture within, unfortunately, in sectors of farming and small businesses, which is a bit cavalier, to put it mildly, as we saw, for example, with that potential discharge from a gas plant. So do you think that there is perhaps more that needs to be done in small business and farming compliance?
And then we'll take this one on the front, please.
For Wessex Water, Froome is looking at massive expansions in terms of population and developments. If the infrastructure currently is not sufficient to cope with the existing storm waters and domestic waters, what provision is Wessex Water making for the future developments around town? And what would you suggest that we try and do to improve in the reduction of domestic waters in terms of developments that occur in sewage? We have one sewage works in Froome. Is that at the capacity to meet the potential expansion of the town with over 2,000 homes being built over the next 5 years?
And then where was the other question over there?
I understand you have to grow bacteriological surveys, but there's loads of sensors that are cheap as chips and you can put them on a mobile phone network for lots of the other pollutants. But how does your AI work? Because my favourite joke about AI is if it's written in Python, it's machine learning. If it's written in PowerPoint, it's AI. So I'm just going to call bollocks on that because I don't believe it.
Yeah, well, that's three questions. The first one was regarding small businesses and small farmers being able to do more. Does anybody want to come in on that one?
I'm happy to talk about business. Yes, so Bart, some of the roles that we get in, we work with local businesses as well. Only this week we've got colleagues that are out working with businesses looking at what's called only rain down the drain. So we go and work with Wessex Water and actually go into business to make sure there's no misconnections, basically. So there's a special dye that's not harmful for the environment, I've got to say that first, that they put down the different drains to make sure that they're not misconnected. So that's one way of kind of working with business to make sure that even those minor things are kind of sorted. That's just, and it's just, whilst you're there, you're kind of proactive as well. So it's kind of, looking at different ways. So we talked about, expansions and sewer overflows and water capacity. Well, with industry as well, it's probably being mindful about kind of your sustainable drainage. So looking at other options where you can maybe store water as well, so that like Ruth was saying, if they're over capacity, not kind of talking to them about, what goes down the toilet, even, we usually do it in schools, but even with business, like just making sure the right things are going down the toilets and they're being sort of mindful with the environment, basically.
Can I'll on the this, no, I don't need that anyway. On the rural businesses, from a farmer's point of view, it's just all about training. It's very much at one time, someone worked on a farm, they worked on that farm for life. These days, it just doesn't happen. Staff retention is a real problem. You've constantly got new people coming onto farms. So I would say it's got to be an annual thing, training the guys what they should be doing in terms of best practice, what they should do when things go wrong. I would also say that not just the farmers, it's the whole rural thing. The towns tends to have the big sewage works and all the sewage goes there. I would say in the rural communities, everyone's relying on soakaways. And these soakaways, I know they're now no longer allowed to be replaced. They have to be replaced with electric ones, but there's still an awful lot of them out there. And we as farmers actually see it. Unfortunately, around here, it's heavy ground. A lot of it's tile drains. So it's got underground drainage put in probably over the last 200 years. And we're often having to fix these tile drains. And we'll often go down and find in there raw sewage coming down, and it's just simply coming from rural properties, rural businesses. We found one from a pub just recently, traced it back to a pub. And that wasn't just a small household, that was an awful lot going down there. So I think the whole rural community needs to look at a little bit what they're doing.
Okay, so questions for me. I guess on your point around businesses, again, just a quick one. So we do analyse our blockage data, and those which are caused by fats, oils and greases, we then look at whether there are any businesses within those areas, and we work with a contractor who goes around and looks at all the fat traps at those locations. So typically takeaways and pubs, and we'll provide them guidance training and replace them where necessary, because it's in our interest to do so, because we don't want blocked sewers. We've also got a stream king team who go and look for misconnections. So these are connections from the foul system into the surface water system. And they do quite a lot of investigative work there as well, because that can have quite a polluting impact. And it's often where there's been building works and people have been unaware of the drainage systems there. In terms of development in Froome, so yeah, I mean, we are lobbying government to remove developers' right to connect to foul sewers for new developments. At the moment, if they can't find a solution for their surface water, they can tap into the foul sewer, which then means it's just overflows at a later date. It's pretty irresponsible of developers to do, but they're perfectly within their legal rights to do so. So we would hope that any new development, the surface water does not come anywhere near the sewerage, the foul sewage system, and is dealt with either through direct discharges to the watercourse or through saferways. We do have a developers team who works with local authorities to understand housing projections, and then we do sewer capacity surveys to understand whether we have got the hydraulic capacity to cater for that development. And if we find that we haven't, then we work with developers to increase the capacity within the network, and they fund that. It doesn't work for treatment works because improvements to treatment works are carried by the entire customer base. Developers at the moment can't contribute to improvements at treatment works for the development which they are connecting. And so that's why part of our developers team works to understand at what point we think our capacity headroom within the sewage treatment works is going to be eroded, such that we then need to apply to Ofworks to invest more money in that sewage treatment works, and when's the appropriate time to do so. So that's the way the mechanism works at the moment. Planning permissions, building rates, things like that, development rates, house building rates are never as projected. And so it's really stop-start and depends on the kind of economy of that time. So working with 25-year design horizons for our infrastructure is good, but it's not perfect. So I will say that. Hopefully that answers your question, but I can follow up afterwards. AI, yeah, so I don't know what coding system it is. It's definitely not PowerPoint. It's far more complicated than that. At the moment, what we are using, so we've got, we're trialing 3 different types of sensors. So one is a YSI sonde, which is a multi-parameter sensor, which uses partly, yeah, so it's a very well established technique. We're using some pro automation sensors, which have only got 4 sensors. So that's conductivity, pH, ORP, oxygen potential, and I can't remember what the other one is, and then another sensor as well. We've got, I think they're always on. They record every 15 minutes. The sonde was deployed last Christmas, and the others have been progressively deployed over the course of the year. There are 30 of them, and they match either our infrastructure, where we have got data that we're collecting in real time, or where we're doing sampling. So this, when I said we're taking samples from 20 locations on I can't remember if it's weekly or fortnightly basis, I can check that. The sensors are also co-located with those, so that we can double check the sensor data, which is being reported back, with the lab data. The sensors don't collect bacteriological data because there's no current way of doing that. But what we're hoping is that by the range of parameters that we're collecting, we can infer relationships between the 2 of them. That's all exported up to an AI platform, which then is correlated with river data, weather data, and asset operations. So flow through sewage treatment works and wet well height. And the idea is if you put all of this data together, we can understand some of those relationships, which means then we can identify what causes water quality deterioration, see that in easily measurable parameters, and then hopefully also be able to predict in future, so that then we can provide those real-time warnings to people who want to go swimming. Pardon? Yeah, at some point we need to develop technology and do it first. But I mean, where we've got the Safer Seas Act, which is surfacing against sewage around overflow operation, our hope would be that you would link this as well, so that then you can have open data, open platform, and be able to predict when events get, when the deterioration is going to happen.
Can we move on to Anne?
Yeah,
Very
just quickly. I think it's important to remember that it's not just about water quality that farmers are being asked to tackle. There's been a lot in the press recently about air quality. One of the and ammonia emissions from livestock is one of the factors that actually makes causes poor air quality. So they're being asked to reduce the ammonia emissions from slurry spreading from all sorts of things like that. But that has a knock-on effect. If the nitrogen in the form of ammonia is not going up into the air, then it's going to go into the soil, or it's going to be in slurry stores, and then it will go on the land, and then there's an increased risk of leaching nitrogen into the watercourses. So I just want to get across to you that it's blooming complicated, what they're being asked to do. And we still don't know some of the effects of the farming rules for water, which came in 2018. They're really starting to bite now. Farmers being pushed to comply. I read a report by ADAS a couple of weeks ago that said, yes, if they implement the farming rules for water, it will decrease nitrogen leaching, nitrate leaching, but it will increase ammonia emissions, and it probably will increase phosphate losses. So yeah, what do we advise? It's biological system. So a trial in one place will give one result, and in another soil, it's a biological system, it could give completely different result. And ADAS produced that report. They've got stacks of experience in producing and doing those trials over the years, but every time a report comes out, it seems to push us slightly in a different direction. There are also been pressures in terms of people were pushed to produce anaerobic digesters. That's had a knock-on effect because a lot of them have been designed to use maize. So maize growing has increased in areas around anaerobic digesters, and then that causes problem late harvest, lots of sediment coming out of the fields, and so by trying to solve one problem, we pollution swap to another problem, and that there's been quite a few of the examples like that over the years.
Thank you very much. Right, we're running quite late now, but the discussion was very good. Thank you very much, panelists. I'm going to be cruel, especially given you just said it's a very, very complicated issue. For the final question, I'm going to ask you all to answer in one sentence only. So can you give one change you would expect to see over the next 5 to 10 years to improve river quality? In one sentence, who'd like to come in first? Was that too short an answer to give everyone a sentence? Now we just have 5 minutes of everyone thinking, thus saving no time at all.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I think for me, obviously we've talked a lot about water quality today, but if there's one thing that I would focus on to change in the river environment, it would be physical modification. And I would try, where possible, to restore natural processes, because that will tick all your boxes, improve your ecology, improve your water quality, it will reduce flood risk, it will do all of the things that we care about in one go. That's my answer.
I was going to say that because when we in FWAG, we've been working with the natural flood management measures, and we keep laughing because the beavers are probably going to take some of our job away, because we've been making artificial beaver dams, in effect, woody dams, modifying the water courses and things like that. So, but I think if it's one thing that I would say, it's investment. That there needs to be investment, both public and into agriculture.
Do beavers get TB? Don't go there.
Google it. Ruth.
So in Wales, there's actually partnership working. I think if people understand, take ownership and actually invest in their local river from a societal perspective, and then also by lobbying, there will be improvements. And it's not all the water companies' fault.
I would say from a farmer's point of view that, as I keep saying about it, it's all about training, operating best practice and sharing the knowledge gained that all the farmers have and then putting it all into practice. And I think you can go a long way to mitigating some of the things we've seen.
And I'd say kind of, I mean, it builds on pretty much everybody, but I think innovation, there's quite a lack of innovation in terms of we can solve a lot of the slurry problems by innovative solutions that are out there, again, but you need funding, innovative kind of ideas of, you know, building fish passes that don't cost $1 million, innovative ways of kind of doing lots of river restoration. So innovation, I think, as well.
Okay, thank you very, very much, panelists. Can we all give them a round of applause? We were going to say that they might be around afterwards for a bit of extra discussion, but given how we've overrun, I'm not sure if they'll be able to, but if they can, please stick around to have a chat with them. Simon from Friends of the River Froome is just going to wrap up this evening, so please don't leave quite yet, and I'll hand over to him.
I'll be very brief. Since we have a room full of people who love our river, we thought this was a great opportunity for Friends of River Froome to announce a new scheme that will be starting in the new year called Froome River Watch. And the idea is to provide continuous monitoring of the conditions of the River Froome and its environments for remedial action and improvements. This is a slightly clumsy sentence, but I'm sure you know what it means. We want to keep watching what happens on the river and making sure it gets acted on. So, by the way, here you see Wallbridge Mill. This is what happens when there's too much rain in the Diffy. And this is all coming out of the houses and going down into the river. Happens regularly.
Combined sewer overflow going in there. Combined sewer overflow.
Yeah, indeed, yes. Right. So here you see the bit of the river that we're talking about. The Friends of River Froome is concerned with this 7-mile stretch from Spring Gardens to Blackbridge. It's connected obviously to all the other bits of the river, but this is what we're going to focus our attention on. And we identified there are a whole number of challenges in our river strategy, which the town council agreed last year. Climate change, higher rain, more drought, flooding, sewage, industrial and urban pollution. It's not just the things we've been hearing about tonight. Agricultural pollution we've heard a lot about. Inappropriate development close to the river. I won't mention Selva Garden community. Hard barriers, such as the weirs we've talked about. Water abstraction, poor bankside management. We've seen some shocking examples of heavy equipment being used on the edge of the river and the banks collapsing. Non-native species, and finally, some recreational activities that can damage the river as well. So you'll see there's a whole lot of challenges to our dear river. So in order to make Froome River Watch work, we've divided our section of the river there up into 6 sections: Watcombe Town Centre, Rodden Meadow, Brook, Adderwell and Felton. For each of these 6 zones, we'd like to appoint 2 volunteers who will watch what happens in that space. And we'll be offering training, and we will also, over the next couple of months, be working with Matt and others, Wessex Water as well, to make sure we've got really tight reporting protocols. But remember, it's not just about pollution. So, by the way, here's another example. This was November last year, an oil spill up in the Marston estate, heating oil, got down to the river. Congratulations, the Environment Agency, you got that boom in place within 2 hours. That was a great example of how the system can work, and not much damage was done. God, it stunk. Anyway, so what do the river watchers do? Well, just briefly, we're asking people to walk their zone monthly and note changes that they see. And these are changes that are not just pollution, changes to wildlife, flooding, anything unusual, damage to habitat or infrastructure, also the water quality stuff we've talked about, but things like the excessive algal blooms, which were mentioned in the dumping and litter, blockages, erosion of banks, footpaths at risk, and developments of planning applications coming up that might affect the river. So if we, in our 6 zones across Froome, we can have people watching out for those things, then we're a long way, I think, to having a kind of intelligent system that will enable us to prevent adverse things happening on the river. So the second function is to make sure that things that are reported promptly to the Environmental Agency in Wessex Water using sort of agreed procedures, and which, of course, many of them are about read. To carry out a monthly water quality check. And quite a nice thing about that is that the Town Council has agreed to put up a notice board outside the library where we will post the results. So people in Froome will be able to see month by month what is happening to their river. To assist in coordinated Friends of River Froome action projects, sometimes it has to be the big players who are the only ones who can sort out the problems, but there are other times when volunteers can go and clear up a mess or deal with a problem. And Friends of River Froome is good at that. And then finally, really important to maintain constructive relationships with the landowners. We're not going to get anywhere just by blaming people. So that's what we want the River Watchers to do. And then just finally, oh, by the way, that picture there, go back. Yeah, here you see July this year. This is about a ton of bits of metal that we hooked out of the river. You see a lot of cable there, for instance, chucked off the railway and off the development site. Chucked in the river, not doing much good, all the metal in that. So that's a bunch of us who in a couple of hours fished all that out. So in terms of how River Watch will actually move forward, we aim to commence in January. We're going to complete a resource pack and training, online training mostly, thanks to Somerset Wildlife Trust and others there. Get the testing and reporting protocols really in place and get our town centre notice board set up. And the final thing to say is a question. Are you a river watcher? If you are interested, we will be putting out an email through the Friends of River Froome mailing system. About 170 people on it now. It's quite a substantial organisation in the town. Do join this evening. We don't bombard you with a lot of stuff. But if you're interested in the river, you can't afford not to know about the Friends of River Froome. So we'll be sending something out in a week or two to tell you how you could apply to be a river watcher. It does require a commitment. It's no good, you know, a flurry of enthusiasm having watched you fired up by Georges Monbiot to say, yeah, I'll do that, and then not find you've got the time to do it. But please do consider whether you be one of those 12 people who will walk the river and then carry out those simple monitoring functions, which we will funnel into a process of getting action. That's it. Thank you very much. And the only other thing to say is you probably want to think twice about buying those happy eggs in future. Thank you very much. Just to finish, I just have to thank our panelists again. It's Ruth, Matt, Melissa, Anne, and David. Thank you very much indeed for really helping. And for giving up a Friday evening when there were lots of good things on at the cinema. So, there are two other people I must thank. Alex who chaired this evening. I think it's the first time you've chaired a meeting like this, is that right? Well, anyway, you did a great job. So a round of applause for our chair. And the unsung hero of this evening, who made it happen by energizing all of us and contacting the speakers, Simon Hicks. Thank you very much, everyone.